2019 was such a phenomenal year for country music that God literally said, no more music. 2020, while not awful by any standards, definitely felt like a complete nosedive on the quality spectrum. But if there's one album that actually got me through the entire year of drab mediocrity, it's Never Will by Ashley McBryde. I mean, that album's a masterpiece. But if you were to take that album out, then I'd have to say Starting Over by Chris Stapleton. But if you were to take that album out, then I'd have to say Kelsea Ballerini's third album, Kelsey. Now, this album isn't a masterpiece. As I said, it came out in a not so great year for country, but it honestly shocks me no one is really talking about this and how well it accomplishes what almost every pop country album of the past decade failed to do. For a year where a majority of music was decent at best, Kelsey provided a new perspective of pop country, a new lens to see through. Everyone likes to assume, blah, it's all lifeless music, it is awful, we need more real instrumentation, but Kelsey might honestly be the best full-blown attempt at pop country. I don't want to count Wildcard because honestly it's more of a rock album with more drum loops here and there, and Golden Hour is its own thing, but this album was the first churned out of Nashville that actually succeeded with its weaknesses. Everyone loves to say Hardy the Rock cracked the bro country code, but Kelsey cracked the pop country code. But before we get into that, we need to get into Kelsey the artist herself. Given how I feel about this album, you'd think I'm a fan of her work. Well, not quite. I'm going to level with you, I'm not a Kelsea Ballerini fan, at least overall. Over the past two releases she's done, none of them are good, to put it lightly. Kelsea Ballerini for the first few years had some of the most shallow pop country I've ever seen. Her debut album was obsessed with two subjects, about getting over a man, whether it's out of sincerity or pettiness. And normally I like that, but the writing for all the songs were just awful. It's all vague, aimless, and the way she sung on these had absolutely no substance. It was an album that had no idea what its message was. And it had some of the absolute worst country songs of the decade with Yeah Boy and Dibs. Dare I say, this album as a whole was a simp. And my initial opinion of her was that Kelsea Ballerini was basically what all the haters of Taylor Swift say Taylor Swift is. Someone obsessed with blind romance, putting no substance or emotion into those stories. And someone obsessed with the whole high school narrative style. And if you don't know what that is, it's basically songs that tell stories about the boy or girl next door, football games, hometown pride. And with Taylor Swift, it worked because a lot of the songs had actual names and details, with Picture to Burn, 15, and The Outside. Plus, it had such a nostalgic 2000s tone. The biggest issue with Kelsea Ballerini was she didn't do anything Taylor Swift did, and she used modern production and musical styles to tell the story, and that makes the corniness feel rotten rather than enjoyable. So my biggest nitpick would be to ditch the high school narrative and put actual subject material into your music. Did she do that? No, not really. I really wanted Unapologetically to be good, you guys, but it faltered in almost the exact same way. Keyword there, almost. While not much of it, there are some actual hints at maturity in this album. Graveyard and Machine Heart have some actual compelling intros I really enjoyed. The song still stumbled over and fell apart, but there was a hint that she was getting better. Apart from that, she still stuck to the high school narrative pretty much verbatim compared to her last album. There is literally a song called High School in this album. Like, the production, while more sophisticated, it was still not a compelling style, still bland and lifeless like all the music that came before. You had drum loops, snap tracks, overly complicated instrumental moments which are just a complete mess. And it was still clear she was trying to be just like Taylor Swift. But there is one moment that actually accomplishes the high school narrative correctly. After 20-something attempts, Legends, while not an objectively good song whatsoever, it has such a nostalgic feel despite being released in 2017. Like, credit where credit's due, this song is ironically great, but it was clear the high school narrative wasn't working whatsoever. The album didn't feel like a progression of her story, rather than just an extension of the first album. No compelling themes of, well, anything. The emotions of this one are the same the entire album. There is no introspective look into her life. Besides Legends, I do not listen to a single song from these two albums. But what does any of this have to do with anything? Well, I'll show you. Now, normally after two failed attempts of the same awful story beats, you'd think Kelsey and her team would be like, well, let's throw this in the garbage, let's try something new. But they decided to continue the same story. with a twist. This album wasn't an extension of the same story the past two were doing. It was an actual progression, rather than just her reliving the same high school story over and over, being in purgatory, if you will. Kelsey is her actually conflicted on leaving this whole narrative style behind. It's the transition period one goes from high school to the real world. I don't know about you, but that sounds like an actual compelling progression of an album. Eric Church albums Heart and Soul Excluded tell a perfect progression and carry out the prior album's themes in new and profound ways. Kelsey, in a sense, is the anti-Kelsea Ballerini album. It runs so counter to the themes of the first two, which wasn't great to begin with, and yet continues the story of Kelsea Ballerini in such a compelling manner. It's all about the pressures of being a star, conflicted on going to a new city, conflicted on losing her roots, and what defines her as a person. Just wow, I didn't expect that from Kelsea Ballerini. I didn't think she could pull something like that off. After two failed attempts, the third time's the charm, I guess. Most people try to throw out the garbage and try to pretend it doesn't exist, and yet are still haunted by that awkward phase of their career. A key example would be artists like Kip Moore and Brett Eldredge. Kip threw out the bro country phase of his career and went on to pursue new avenues with Slow Heart and Wild World. Brett Eldredge had a complete 180 as he suffered from similar issues the other Kelsea Ballerinis did and made Sunday Drive a shockingly rich and mature contemporary album. And while these albums themselves are good, they feel disconnected from the overall story of themselves. I already said Eric Church albums progress naturally. These albums feel like retcons. So to continue a story from an awful previous installment in such a powerful manner deserves some credit and even some respect. But that's just one aspect the album finally got right. It still has writing and production issues to jump over. How does the album fare in those categories? I think one of the biggest changes you'll notice with this album is the writing. While the first two were shallow, the writing for this album is so good it's mind-blowing that it came from the same artist. Part of this is due to the fact the writing team has mostly changed for a majority of the songs, allowing for them to ditch all the negative aspects the first time and unapologetically had. The first song on the album, Overshare, has one of the most fun and one of the most clever choruses of any song in 2020. I overshare because I overcare about the person over there who's completely unaware that I oversing and then I overdrink to overcompensate. Not only does that roll off the tongue so smoothly, Kelsey gives it such a vibrant tone which excels the song's quality so much. Homecoming Queen is all about societal pressures one would go through about being themselves and opening up to others, and it's a high school narrative song which, unlike Legends, works in an unironic way. It is so actively compelling, so mature that you honestly can't believe it came from the same artist who did Peter Pan. The Other Girl is all about a dude who's cheating, and these two women don't know who is the one he's dating and who is the mistress. And the way this song brings up this confusion and mystery is so clever and naughty. I honestly thought this was turning into a murder ballad, which would have been awesome. But despite that, the song is great. Hole in the Bottle is all about a woman getting over a man drinking wine to cope and is in denial that she's in emotional turmoil. And her excuse is that there must be a hole in the bottle of the wine. It's stupid and simple, but come on, it's such a clever story. Not to mention, it's a bop, one of the songs I constantly listen to in 2020. Half of My Hometown takes the center stage as the emotional core of the album, all about her conflict with leaving what makes Kelsea Ballerini herself behind, using all the tropes of football games, cheerleaders, and first cars, yet despite that, none of it detracts from such a mature and surprisingly powerful message, and LA serves as such a bittersweet yet mature ending to this story, which actually doesn't answer the central question on whether or not she is going Hollywood with her music and her life. And normally I consider that an issue, but for here, I give it an exception because we the listener get to decide that for ourselves, which is a nice subversion which I only really see in films. It's a well sought out cliffhanger and we'll just have to wait and see what the answer will be. I have a whole video about my problems with pop country and I really don't want to explain myself again, but there are 3 massive problems with pop country which keep it from being an exceptional subgenre. Lack of any real instrumentation, lack of compelling writing, and oversaturation of melodies. There were 2 other pop country albums that came out in 2020, both of which I actually consider good. Ingrid Andress' Ladylike and Sam Hunt's Southside. And while I do enjoy these albums, both of which fail to get past all 3 issues. Ingrid Andress' Ladylike does something really inventive, which is conflating pop and country. Instruments such as steel and banjo actually meld in with synths and other electronics, making for such a unique style of music. This album has More Hearts Than Mine and The Stranger, both really mature and beautiful songs, but apart from that, this album takes a complete nosedive with the writing and opts out for some oversaturated story beats that don't take the album to any great places, thus failing to get past the second issue, lack of compelling writing. Melodically, I think this album is really great, and Ingrid is one of the most powerful new vocalists of this new wave of artists, but it is still held back. Southside, on the other hand, does the opposite of Ladylike and keeps the pop and country music styles completely separate, allowing for them to have their own individual moments. The writing overall is a bit stronger, but it also fails with oversaturation of melodies. Songs like Young Once and That Ain't Beautiful are so repetitive and just feel lazily written. Young Once's main chorus is, "We were young, we were young, we were young once. Somebody get this guy a Grammy." As you can see, both of these albums fail to get past all the issues the pop country genre has. But how does Kelsey fare? What if I told you it flies past all 3 issues with flying colors? We've already gone over the writing, the best of her entire career, and some of the best of 2020, but production-wise, Kelsey does something so massive, so incredibly necessary that I'm shocked no one else has talked about it. Listen to this sample of Love and Hate. Can you tell me what makes this Snaptrack song infinitely better than any other Snaptrack song ever done? The volume of the snap is turned down. Anticlimactic? Yeah, I know. But the biggest problem with Snaptracks wasn't that they existed, it was that they stuck out like a sore thumb and they were the only thing you could focus on. You can't hear any of the guitar chords, no piano or bass. You can't focus on any of it because you kept hearing snaps. With this simple yet incredibly important change, songs are allowed to breathe and let the instrumentation complement Kelsea Ballerini's vocals, which also have the Snaptrack itself stay within the song. I am shocked it took this long for pop country producers to get it right. Every song that has Snaptracks, skittering drum loops are turned down, except for Braggart, but that song just sucks in general. Despite being the most bombastic of all the tracks, Hole in the Bottle has some truly exceptional musicianship throughout all of it. I'm hoping many artists and producers can learn from what this album has accomplished. As for stagnant melodies and delivery, Kelsea Ballerini has an absolute blast with this album. She is far more expressive with her emotions. She's able to convey sass, naughtiness, sensitivity, and perkiness. As you can see, this album is arguably the only modern pop country album to get past all 3 issues. Now, the album isn't a masterpiece. There's only one pop country album in existence to accomplish that, and it came out way before the pop country era. It has a bit holding it back with some songs that frankly feel like filler, Needy and a country song, that's not a joke, that's literally the title, don't really serve a purpose in the overall story this album is trying to convey, and Braggart and a few other songs could have had a few tweaks of restructure. If only there was a way Kelsea Ballerini would be able to accomplish that. Oh wait! I'm always looking for new and inventive concepts artists put into their albums, whether it be the Love Triangle trilogy in folklore or the constant continuation of songs in Country Squire. Unfortunately, inventive moments such as those rarely come around, and while I enjoy Kelsey, I was not prepared for what she did next. You see, her self-titled album is actually split into 2 parts, Kelsey and Ballerini. Both have the same songs, tell the same story, yet are told in differing tones and perspectives. Kelsey is all about what defines Kelsey as a person, which is her fun personality and pop fusion styles. Ballerini, on the other hand, is all about what was handed down to her from a past generation, her family roots, in a sense, her musical roots, as this is a more acoustic and traditional country album given her standards. Talk about being creative with the album process. This is something the likes of which has never been done before. I'm looking for words to describe the somatic genius the concept of this album has. This isn't just a cheap cash grab of an acoustic album whatsoever. Every song has been restructured, from the instrumentals, musical styles, and melodies, even down to the writing. If you're not a fan of the electro bop of Hole in the Bottle, well, take this western swing instead. The electric version is awesome, but I love the western swing version so much, it's just so good. If you think the vocals of Homecoming Queen are repetitive and stagnant, well come over here, the melody is almost completely different. Want Love Me Like a Girl, an already beautiful song, be even more raw and make you weep with joy? Then check this out. It takes songs such as Bragger, which are just awful, and makes them actually decent and palatable. Love and Hate went from an Ed Sheeran-like pop song to a rootsy jam band of a song. It feels like she's finally stepped out of Taylor Swift's shadow and become her own person with this song and these two albums. My only real major complaint was that some of the songs from the original, which were great, don't really need a fixer-upper like Overshare, Club, and Homecoming Queen. While the remastered versions are good, I think they serve better with a more pop-like style. I cannot express how much of an improvement this album is. This album feels like a completely uncompromised vision, an album that wants to tell the exact story it wants to tell without any executive interference. The way I feel about this album is the same way people view Zack Snyder's Justice League, a top-down improvement over what came before in nearly every way. I already like Kelsey quite a lot, it's a solid 7 out of 10, but Ballerini is such a phenomenal 8 out of 10 album, one of my absolute favorite moments of all of 2020. Frankly, I'm sick of people saying the biggest problem with country music is the sound of it. I love traditional instrumentation as much as everyone else, but the sound of pop country music wasn't the problem. It's how it was handled. It's always been lazy with its production. I can imagine the songs between 2017 and 2018 being churned out on an assembly line, and it's mostly because of lack of substance and subject material. Kelsey shows us you don't need to be a traditional country album to be good. The aspects everyone hates from pop country can actually work if given enough time and effort. Even though I'm not a fan of her overall work, Kelsea Ballerini in my eyes is slowly becoming an artist I truly respect, and trust me, that is not a phrase I utter lightly. This album is a compromise of what makes country music great and what the suits demand in Nashville, and she had the added benefit of showing us the original vision of this album, proving she's not a substanceless mainstream nobody. She is a cut above the rest. I remember when I first listened to this, I thought it was just a fluke, but given how much I've seen up till now, Kelsea Ballerini is someone I firmly believe we can all expect great things from.